Right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming.
Very skilled.
We really appreciate you being here and folks on Zoom. Oh, if you're on Zoom and you want to make a comment or direction, please let us hear from you. We want to hear from you. I don't think we have any visitors today, do we, Mark, or just part of the home team?
Oh, yeah.
She wants her name on a tag over there, Linda Palomino, so she's not visiting anymore.
That's right. Linda, you're part of
To me.
you're part of the crowd now. Well, we thank you for coming. I just wanted to tell you that how much I have enjoyed these three little lessons so far in Ruth, 84 verses. We really have, it's meant a lot to me. This is our last lesson in Ruth. And I think the reason I'm so attracted to it, because it's not one of our long 3-year lessons. There's so much we don't know and so much we imagine about it that had to be going on. I don't like John at all, but I read something this morning that's interesting, but I'll get into that at the end. But with that said, John, would you have our prayer, please?
Father in heaven, we are blessed to know that the Creator of the universe cares about each one of us. That we have this opportunity to learn more about you, your love and your plans for us. We ask your Spirit to be with us as we study today. May we be drawn closer to you, we pray in Jesus'
I understand there's a big camp something going on. People are campers. I deal with camping back when I was younger was a Holiday Inn with a black and white TV. I don't think I ever went camping.
Agree with you.
But yeah, we did a couple of times. Sorry. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Okay, John.
I paid my price for camping and I don't. First of all, it is an absolute honor to be here. I really appreciate you folks coming in. It truly is. This is as a reminder, a lot of what we get from this is from each other. And so as thoughts come to mind, please feel free to share those thoughts. Group. So helpful, and you just never know when something that somebody says touches somebody else, touch away, and it sometimes can change someone's life. So don't hesitate. This is kind of my kind of story. Has anybody over there turn off light? Anybody ever seen Texas Ranger? Chuck Norris?
Sure.
Now, I don't think Trish particularly cares for that show. I don't watch it very much, but when I'm going through the channels and I see it's on and it's at the end of the show, I always turn it on. I really like watching it. And the reason why is that notoriously, what happens at the beginning of the show, something bad happens to some really good people. You know, and so it's really uncomfortable. And at the end of the show, Chuck Norris, Texas Ranger, goes and beats the snot out of the bad people, and the good people end up in a great place. You can count on that. You know, like, I remember my kids used to love to come home and watch Touched by an Angel. Well, that's kind of the same thing. I mean, think about stories or in your life like that. Years ago, I used to like watching big time wrestling. WWE, big time, Big John Studd, Leaping Larry Shane, Big the Bruiser, that's years back there.
Stack Calhoun.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, you know, what happened, I used to always love Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Because he would come into the ring with a 2x4. You know, and he was a good guy. He would salute the American flag. Now, he wouldn't always win, but you were cheering for him. Well, I went down, I kept my home here, but I went down and moved down to Orlando to run UBS. And Jim Duggan and I became good friends down there. And he once was the end of his career. And he was still, you could see him on television once in a while on WWE. And he was invited to travel to Japan to wrestle for the National WWE Japanese Wrestling Championship. Now, don't ask how he got selected for that. It wasn't because of wins and losses or anything like that, I can assure you, but they called him and, you know, they wrote the check and he showed up and he was wrestling against what they call the $1 Million Man. Now, the $1 Million Man was a bad guy. He'd go into the ring and he'd be dressed like a business person, open up his thing, start throwing money at the crowd, you know, and stuff, but he was a bad guy. Actually, in the locker room, he was really a good guy. But this is all choreographed. Jim and the $1 Million Man were good friends, but here they're enemies, and they're wrestling for the Japanese championship, and they're in the ring, and Duggan Hacksaw is getting just beat up at the beginning. And then finally, he's catching up. And so what happens, also, by the way, it's in Japan, and usually Jim's wife never travels with him. But it's in Japan, it's different, never been there, so she went along, you know? So anyway, they're at the end of the match, and now I didn't see it. Duggan, you know, over dinner is telling me about this. He goes, the thing is about the Japanese is they do not, in these wrestling matches, they do not tolerate the bad guy winning. The good guy's gotta win. So it was choreographed. I'm the good guy. I'm gonna win this thing, you know? So it's at the end of the match, and Jim lines up against the $1 Million Man, and he's gonna do a clothesline. Stick his arm out, run, hit him in the neck, knock him out. So he runs, $1 Million Man ducks, Hacksaw hits the referee and knocks out the referee. Of course, Duggan being the good guy, he's bending over, you know, oh, are you okay? You know, oh, gee whiz. $1 Million Man goes into the corner and grabs Hacksaw's 2x4. And he goes up and he's raising it above the air. Of course, all the crowd is saying, oh, Hacksaw, look out, you know, he's gonna hit you. You know, they're trying to warn him. The crowd's yelling. He reaches up about ready to cold cock him, and Hacksaw's wife, Jeanette, jumps into the ring and grabs a 2x4. Hacksaw turns around, goes, oh, runs, clotheslines him, knocks him out. Referee wakes up just in time and Hacksaw wins. You gotta love it. Anyway, what does that have to do with Ruth in this story? No, she had nothing to do with it. She's not a resident. Well, I don't know. But what it does have to do with something, and this is the 4th chapter, is I can't help but think that there are good stories in our lives where good things happen. And they've happened to you, and there's lessons that can be learned from that, I think. They don't always lead good, but this one does. And one of the lessons of the story, to let the cat out of the bag since I said that, is that many of your stories are not over with you. It's not done. And so you might be in the middle of that battle, but you don't quit. And that's one of the lessons that we need to take out of that. The transformations that I've gone through in my life, I can relate to some of the things that Ruth and Naomi had to go through. And so what's a good story? What's the definition of success? How do you measure success? It's more than just a wrestling match or Chuck Norris beating somebody up. It's more than that. And as I have gone through my life, I've changed that definition a number of times. There are times where people will tell like rags to riches story. I was so poor and then I did so well. Oh, I did it. Is that success? I suppose there was a time in my life where I thought that was, and that's relevant. I know it is. But I'm just wondering, when I look back at people in my life and in your life who are heroes that changed your life. People somehow walked in the door at a certain time or some events happened. You were changed. You were impacted by it. You may not even be sitting here if it weren't for some little thing that somebody. And nobody knows it. Oftentimes, having a military background, how many people did something that would have won them the Medal of Honor? Those people. And so I want you to think about that. Your lives, where things turned out really well, or maybe in the middle of something challenging. And a hero shows up and we begin to think, well, what is the making of a hero? Making of someone like that, because there are heroes in this story. But for this class, for this hour, to be effective, you have to walk in the door different than the way you walk out. And so that's a really important reflection that I want you to go through. Can anyone think your life where there was a hero in some way? Anything come to mind?
I was not a stellar student. In fact, I was one of the foremost rebellious kids. Walking teachers. Head up and made fun of her. Not very nice way. Right at that time, the principal walked around the corner and saw me. Treated me very graciously and very mercifully. Never forget it. He was a hero because I was expecting another.
How long ago was that?
That was about 13 years ago.
Yeah, right.
That was in 1966.
Over a half century ago, and you still remember it.
Yes, yes. He's a hero. And the thing is, the last few years, I'm really good friends with his son.
So, in your mind, a hero, somewhat defined by how you treat other people, you treat dignity and value, even sometimes when they don't deserve it.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Staying on the same theme, today is my 45th high school reunion at Blue Mountain Academy. Now, at Blue Mountain Academy in the 1970s, there was 400 and some odd kids, and they had a huge keep the rules. And so God had his arms crossed, and the theme for the whole school was the banana that leaves the bunch gets peeled. And so you told the line, and it was the picture of God was, if you do something wrong, you're going to get smashed, boiled down to. Then there was a guy named Dale Jacobson, whoever the heck that is, who came to Blue Mountain Academy, who had just finished inventing stealth technology for the US government, who was a scientist beyond his years, who took a pay cut of God knows how many thousands of dollars to come to Blue Mountain Academy. And he reflected, him and his brother-in-law, Bob, reflected a Jesus that had their arms out like this. And even though I cannot be with my class today, I'm having my own little mini reunion right here. There's a hero.
There you go.
Yay.
Any other reflections? Yes, ma'am.
In that, I guess I always thought about pros, you had to do something like, big, like get somebody out of trouble and
Right.
put them in a safe place, or spend a lot, have money and be able to help them or buy them a
Me too.
car.
Yeah.
And kindness, that's,
When you really care, these school stories. I remember I was fed up. I was at West Point. I was fed up. Basketball wasn't going well. Grades weren't great. Wasn't really getting along with my roommates. Homesick. And this just wasn't worth it. I remember packing a bag and walking out of my room. I was gonna go out the south gate, climb out the gate, catch a bus, go to Port Authority and find a plane, travel home. So I was about at the wall. Behind me, I heard some noise and somebody grabbed me by my collar and threw me down. He was bigger than me. He ended up his senior year being an All-American football player at West Point. But anyway, he threw me down and he looked at me and said, "You can leave. That's okay, you can leave, but you're gonna go out the front door. You're not going out the back door. You're going out the front door. Now we're going back." And I got up the next morning. I couldn't leave then because I'd studied for this test and I had to go take the test. And then I was gonna get a weekend off 3 weeks from now. So I was looking forward to that. Couldn't miss that. So days turned into weeks, turned into months, turned into years. But that was a pivotal time. And that man did not have to do that. He became an extremely close friend of mine over the years. Reflect on him a lot. I gave the eulogy at his funeral years ago. Thousands of people. That was a hero. And what made him a hero is there was no cameras. There was no notoriety. He was looking after a friend. That's what he was looking after, somebody he cared about. I think that this is relevant for our story today. We're going to get into chapter 4, and I think this conversation, I think you'll relate to it based on these stories. So here's what we're going to do. Some of you were here for some, if not all, of the first 3 chapters. This is like a play with 4 acts to it. I mean, if you were going to make a movie or a play on scripture, this is perfect. I mean, this is a touch by an angel. And Chuck Norris is going to win at the end of this, so this is really, really cool. But we have to understand kind of, and let's review the first 3 chapters. So everybody kind of gets up to speed. So I'm going to go through this. If I forget something, don't feel like you can't add to it. So let's review the book of Ruth. We start out with Elimelech and Naomi had to pack up and move from Judah to Moab due to a terrible famine that was affecting the family. So they had to go. She and her husband with their 2 sons, who eventually took wives in Moab, went. Well, Ruth was a Moab woman who was married to one of their sons, Milan, who was considered an Israelite. So you got a Moabitess and an Israelitess. Now we've talked about that in previous classes. We don't have to get too far in the weeds. But Moab was not a trip to Disney World. This was not a real nice place. And the people, particularly the women, were not looked at in high regard. Generations prior to that, it was the women that were getting actually blamed for a lot of the pagan worship that was going on there. So they were not really well thought of. So, of course, tragically, Naomi lost her husband and 2 sons. He was broken and empty. And she decided to move back to Bethlehem in Judah. Her daughter-in-law Ruth, who had also lost her husband, Naomi's son, accompanied her back to Bethlehem despite Naomi's efforts for her to stay in Moab. Naomi was concerned. Here you have a Moabite moving back to Israeli country, and this wasn't going to be easy. And I think Naomi saw that, and she was concerned. I mean, when Ken taught his class, we talked about light and dark. Bethlehem kind of being a symbol of the light which they were going to, and we talked about that. Did a great job there. So Ruth was going there as a foreigner. But she was extremely loyal to Naomi, her mother-in-law. And she said she wanted to follow the God of Israel. Now, she really didn't know, I don't think, what that meant. But she'd been hanging around Naomi a little bit here, so, all right, this is where, this is a track, there was some evidence that this is what she wanted to do. So with that, that brings us in a very, very 30,000-foot level, kind of where we're at today. We have a woman who lost her 2 sons and her husband. We have 2 wives that lost their husband. One stayed, Oprah stayed. Ruth went with Naomi into a foreign country to start a life all by herself. Ruth had no children. She was a widow, and the prospects were really dismal. Naomi was older, and it probably looked worse for her. Not like she can go out and get a job. Not what this culture was. This was a real tough thing. But don't worry. We have the final scene of our play. So let me read chapter 4. I'm going to read this slow. Read it slow, follow along. Not very long. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz came over here, my friend, and sit down. So we went over and sat down. All right. So what's happened here at the stage is we have had discussions about kinsman redeemer here. Does anyone here care to define what a kinsman redeemer is? You have an idea? Huh? Yeah.
Someone who is responsible for helping out their relatives who are in dire circumstances, either mostly financially, but not necessarily limited to that. It had to be a blood relative,
Right?
had to be in good standing, financially well off.
There's actually 2 more. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Well, they were usually the oldest, especially if they were the avenger of the.
Well, what it was is that there was an order. I mean, there was a defined order. This was not subjective. This is the next of kin. And so what happened here is that, also what happened is that Ruth, during these times, if you weren't an Israelite, if you were a widow, I mean, how were you going to get food? Well, what they did is that when they harvested, I mean, it was required by law. God directed it, but it was their welfare program where they'd have to leave some of their harvest on the floor, and they would then go back and pick it up. And people could take that. And so that's what Ruth was doing, and she happened to go to Boaz's farm. And Boaz was a relative of her husband, a close relative. But he wasn't first in line. And I think what happened here, and we'll get to it in the thing, but Boaz, I mean, initially kind of liked Ruth. And so, you know, there was something there. Yeah,
And one other thing to set the stage even further, we're told in chapter 1 that this was done, this story took place in the time of the judges when everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So if I wanted a wife, I just killed the husband.
that is so relevant.
And so why is the rules being, covered, the hierarchy and everything? I think it's because they were trying to follow God's law in Bethlehem.
You know, and the thing about that, the context that you just said, is that you're not gonna find too many stories with a happy ending like this. In the book of Judges, there aren't too many. There's not a lot of, oh, by the way, who's the next king? Saul, that went well, so, here we go. So that's what makes this really cool. So, great context. So Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of his elders to the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. All right, so there's some evidence that Boaz was probably a pretty respected fellow. I want 10 elders come here, and they came. Sit down here, they sat down. Yeah.
This guy that was closer than Boaz, did he not know that he was next in line? Was he shirking his duty and not having done something before? We don't really get much about him.
We do. Hold on, we do. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to her brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention, suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except for you, and I am next in line." He says, "I will redeem it." So he'll redeem it. Why did he say, "I'll redeem it"? Yeah, I'll get the land.
Redeem it how?
Well,
That's it.
yeah, you possess it. It's yours. And what happens here, and that includes property, land, but that's what he was thinking. But who's on the scene here? Just a second. Who's on the scene here? Ruth is on the scene.
Is he buying the property then from Naomi?
Yes, he has first right of the property. But with that goes Ruth. The second gentleman. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth, the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead and his property." And then he said, "I can't redeem this." So he backed out. Because Ruth was in line and he didn't want to do that. He said it would endanger his own estate. Then he says, "You redeem it for yourself. I can't do it." Yeah, John.
This is not a permanent purchase. It was like a lease. A lease would give Naomi and Ruth a little bit of income.
Yeah, the whole thing about this kinsman redeemer, is that in this culture, Naomi and Ruth had no future unless somebody redeemed them. This gave them, if it could happen, a little bit of financial footing and an opportunity to continue their lineage, continue to have offspring. Otherwise, there was no hope. Yeah.
Some of the commentary that I read said this kinsman guy likely didn't have any children. He likely already had a wife. So by marrying Ruth, if Ruth had a baby first, then his whole estate plus would go to Ruth's firstborn. And that's why he said, nope, I ain't doing it.
I see. Very interesting. And the plot thickens in our play. Yeah, John.
But Boaz, he was an older.
John, you gotta speak up and back the line.
Boaz, being an older gentleman, probably already had children, and maybe he had already given them their inheritance.
Maybe. Let's not get too far in the weeds here. I want to keep the play in center here, big boy. All right, let's move on. All right. Now, in the earlier times, all right. Now, he just said, I can't do it. I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed the sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witness that I have brought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with this property. So this is his, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses. Then the elders and all those at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day hath not left you without kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For the daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The woman living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This is then family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Aminadab, Aminadab the father of Nasham, Nasham the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. Of course, we know the lineage of Christ comes from there. Kind of a nice story. I am wondering, I have a couple questions for you. What happened in the context of this story, if you connect chapter 3 and chapter 4, is that Naomi was coaching Ruth. You know, and in fact, you would think there would have been a sexual flavor to it, the way it's even described here. You'd think there would be. You know, put on perfume, you know, lay at his feet at night, cover his feet, left in the morning before it was light, not be spotted, met with her at a place actually where there was a lot of prostitution going on, and met with her there. But none of that was there. That was not the case. And so, but Ruth obeyed, and Boaz fell in line. I'm wondering, we have some really interesting characters here. We have Boaz, we have Ruth, we have Naomi. Of those three, which do you seem to be aligned with yourself? Who do you really are drawn to? What they did, how they performed? Boaz, Ruth, or Naomi? Which one?
Boaz.
Why Boaz, Jared? Why Boaz? Who are you drawn to? All of them have wonderful qualities in this story. Sir,
Part of the story that I need to know. Obviously, we're not gonna know it in this, or was already happily married with a family? I hope not. It kind of messes up the story.
I sort of wondering what happily married means.
I don't know about
change the direction.
Put that one up
Yeah.
in the back. I can't answer that. But, I read this morning where the scholars believe that Boaz's wife and family had died. We are living in the time of the judges. They could have been killed. We don't know, but most scholars believe at this time he was not married. And at this time, he's also 80 years old. And Ruth is 40. That means it.
It does. I mean, I think that we're never gonna know the whole story. We do have evidence here, at least I see evidence, that this guy was probably a pretty good guy. You know, I
Yes.
get that, you know,
That.
that your questions, you bet, we knew those things. If what Ken said is true, that probably,
Then I identify with Boaz at that point.
well, what is it about Boaz then? Let's assume those things are true. What do you like about him?
It was, right? He obviously fell in love with a young lady, but, became part of the lineage of,
Okay, I believe he did fall in love with Ruth. That was not a criteria. Here, I mean, this was not a subjective thing. You're next in line. I mean, you get some benefit here. You're next in line, you get some benefit here. You know, and so, and during this time, women were property. They were property.
Didn't men have multiple wives back then?
I'm sure.
Yeah, so that was not looked down upon.
No, this was fine. It's fine. I know. Yes, sir.
As in many of us men, we think we're in charge. We may not.
Well, who was in charge here?
Who was manipulating behind the scenes?
I was in charge.
Well, God was in charge. Got it, John. But it's still, I mean, it's fair. You know, what was said here, you know, sometimes what you think. And oh, by the way, you know, I mean, there are times when I'm looking at God and there's times I'm not. God looks, I believe God's looking at me all the time, even when I'm not looking at him. So that's fair enough. Yeah.
Well, in my life, I've had those different roles. I can look and see when I was really in need and people came and helped me. And then I saw a time when I could help other people. And so I was able to be needy, to help, and then just relax and let God lead.
See, when I read this and studied this, I reflected on the transformations in my life. And I can relate to some of these things, not exactly like this, but I can I can relate to getting the snot kicked out of me like the beginning of a Chuck Norris film.
Yeah.
And I can remember somebody coming in and giving me a hand, and helping me. No, I can relate to this. And so when I say, which character do you relate to? Well, where are you at in life right now? Because that will probably be helpful in deciding who you relate to. Yes, sir.
Interestingly, I often wondered as I read this story, how come Boaz why wasn't Naomi the one that's the target of the story? That was kind of an interesting twist to me, is that they would have probably been more closer to age.
All right, I'm not gonna understand this because I asked the same question, but this is what I came up with myself. In marrying Ruth, that captured a benefit for Naomi. Naomi now had hope. I mean, she sold land, because she needed some financial benefit. So marrying Ruth, Naomi was now part of this inner circle to get benefit from this. Yes, ma'am.
I think Ruth was targeted, if you want to say it that way, is because she could children. Naomi probably couldn't.
Well, I mean,
anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, so to continue the lineage, which is part of the whole point of this Redeemer concept, is I think because then she could have 10 children.
I came up to, somebody would say, well, God can make anything happen, look what happened to Rachel. But notwithstanding that,
It's within the family name.
yeah, and I don't know.
That was the whole thing. They needed to keep the
Ruth was
property.
younger. I don't know, maybe she was a looker, maybe Baez, but, so, I don't know, but I know this is where it landed.
It is interesting to see that when Boaz explains to Ruth why he was attracted to her, it wasn't so much, hey, you're beautiful, because you should have been attracted to a younger man, so he's flattered and that's a good thing. But he's talking about her character. We learned from chapter 3, and we learned from this, you are an upright woman. You have taken care of your mother-in-law.
That's
I
right.
think you have a lot of.
That's what I was, so which character do you connect with the most at this point, do you think?
Well, I will guarantee you, in high school, I looked across to the other side and wondered which one of those was gonna wake up at my feet.
Sure.
But, so I always wondered, hey, Boaz Boaz is the guy I think this is a neat story from his perspective.
Who gets credit for a team winning, the coach or the players? Because Naomi was actually the coach in it.
Yeah.
Coaching Ruth.
Good point.
And if you want to give the coach credit, it's
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it would have happened with, I believe in my heart it wouldn't have happened without Naomi. Yeah, John.
Keep remembering the King Solomon verse that says a three-stranded cord is not easily broken. You've got Boaz, Naomi, and Ruth, just like you have the father, son. Each one of them had a part to play. None of the other people could play the part that the other person played. Also remember Jesus saying, other sheep have I, not called.
Yep. Yeah.
A question about. Confused. I don't know how old Naomi is, when the last time she had a child. Naomi took the child, her grandchild, and laid it at her bosom and began to nurse it? How does that work?
Are you asking me? That's one of the things about leading these classes. We know everything.
That kind of like puzzled, I stumbled over that. I'm like, how, that happens?
It happens around the world. If the mother goes to work, grandma can nurse the baby.
You have to have milk.
If they've been pregnant, which they obviously have since they had the child, nurse again. That's right. Figure said. A physiological thing.
Have you had children? Well, go give it a try.
Can you volunteer? See, I asked for volunteers.
Prove it.
Sorry, that was the best I could do.
You gave me a zinger, I got anyway.
Okay, I've been meditating on this all week, and it's like, all three have good character. It's like, for Ruth to leave and go with Naomi, there had to have been a good bond, you saw, love for her mother-in-law. And there must have been good character in Naomi had to have been so broken down. And she didn't, when they went to Bethlehem or wherever they were at, Ruth said, I'm gonna go glean in the field. She said, sure, go do that. It wasn't until that the things that she brought back with her after gleaning that she realized that the tides were turning for them. And when she drew the interest, asking them, where did you go? Where did you glean?
Sure.
That's where she picked up, and I'm sure that it was, that's when her hope started happening. I think that's when the hope began for her, and saw the interest that Boaz was giving to her and wanted to help her, help all of them. And then for Ruth to put on her best clothes, go lie in the dirt at a stinky man's feet. She had to have had knowing that his character, his trust, and so I think it's good character for all three. Of what, it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's just amazing.
No, what you're saying makes sense. I mean, have you ever been a place in life where you had no hope?
Oh, yeah.
You had no hope, and then all of a sudden, something happened and there was a glimmer. And you ran to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you didn't have any.
I relate to Boaz. The reason I do that, like the way he approaches problems. He had a problem here. He got into solution finding instead of fault assignment. We've all worked for managers who like to do fault assignments. Here's a guy has a problem, you go out and find a solution. You're trying to blame somebody else for your problem.
Oh, so relevant. Yeah, been there.
We've all
Yeah, I know.
been there.
I think Naomi is sort of in that same boat because it's also survival mode. So she's also looking for solutions and trying to make sure that she didn't drag her daughter-in-law just so that they can starve to death. So like she's industrious and, cleaning out that old property, and she's definitely looking.
Yeah, she again, to get back to the hope thing, there wasn't much there for her. I'm an old lady with a dead husband and dead sons, and all I got here is a daughter-in-law. Too bad. But she didn't look at it that way. I know that. But us from the outside looking in, you can see.
That daughter-in-law loved her and was very, very loyal to her. And that makes a big difference when you've got somebody that loves you and is loyal.
Well, did the daughter-in-law have anything left but her? I mean, that's all she had was the security of each other. That's all either one of them had. And then the old man come on the scene.
Ruth was an outcast. Have been considered an outcast in this area. The Moabites were not looked at, with an embracing feeling. Yes, sir.
Me, the thing that makes this whole thing work is something called love. Because each one of them were taking risks. Ruth followed Naomi because she was worried about her, cared for her, and she was responding to Naomi's love. Naomi's taking a risk because she's gonna have more responsibility bringing a foreigner that is hated by Israelites. So she's gonna have, coming into Israel with nothing, and she's gonna have to take care of Ruth too. And then she's got Boaz, he's taking a risk too. They're all taking risk, and love is what makes it work.
See, I'm sitting here thinking about Neil. Neil pulls me off the back gate at West Point. I feel like I can relate to Ruth. Neil could relate to Naomi. You're going with me. You know, at that point in time, I can see that. You know, they knew each other. He knew me. We loved each other. They loved each other. I can see that. I can resonate with that character. Yes, sir.
If we go back to the Israel versus Moab picture, it gives Ruth a new start. If she sees something in Naomi that maybe she attributes to the Israelite world rather than the Moabite world, she doesn't want to go back to the Moabite world. She wants something better, and she's hoping that Israel has something better for her too. So that may be an aspect of this, because Naomi apparently illustrated to Ruth the better qualities of Israel. And therefore it made it attractive for Ruth to follow Naomi back to Israel rather than to stay in Moab.
What you said to me, which is really important, and this is how I can resonate with Ruth. Ruth says, all right, I'm going to go follow your God. I'm going to go into this land that I am not probably going to be welcome in. She was willing to take risk. She took risk. I think in this place where there's no hope, for me, one of the criteria is to battle out of that is how much risk am I willing to take? Because if you're not going to take risk, you're going to stay where you're at. If you take risk, you're going to move somewhere. Yeah, Ken.
When I think of Boaz, I come back to the old saying, timing is everything. He saw something there. I don't know what it was, but he was moving very fast. I don't know if he saw this other Kingsman Redeemer at the barley harvest, and maybe that guy had a bad year. Maybe he just bought some more property. Maybe he was having marital problems already. I don't know, but Boaz is on his horse and he is moving quickly. And I really admire him for that.
Yeah, me too.
Thinking about what you just said, Mr. Lincoln, how characteristics of Naomi. And I'm thinking about how God is looking at Ruth and sees characteristics in her, because she will be the mother of that lineage. And
Yeah.
I mean, she's a foreigner. And so it's such a cool story how God chose someone not from Israel, but from Moab. Again, it's like, what a neat story that he scooped her up out of unforeseen circumstances, all these tragedies that happened to his whole family. But that's God's ultimate plan, to move them back into the land where all these blessings will take place.
You know, in preparation for this, I contacted every one of the instructors and Doug and Dewan and asked them, what was the point in your instruction that you wanted to make sure people walked out with? And one of the points that somebody brought up was that everybody has value. In God's eyes, you're equal. There's none of this. We had a discussion in the men's Bible study yesterday morning, and there was disagreement. But in my mind, I believe in God's mind, you and I are equal. You and I are equal. I'm not better than you because I happen to fall on this side of the sex deal. We're equal and we have wonderful value. And it makes no difference if I'm an Moabite or a Woabite. You know, I was created by the Father, and so were you. And there is value in that. And I think if we approach each other, there's lessons in life when we walk out this door. How do we treat and approach each other? Somebody.
You know, in Jesus' time, the Pharisees and most of the Jewish people thought that God only loved us because we're Israel.
Right?
In his providence, way before Jesus, chose Rahab and Ruth, who were not Israelites. Go. And if the Pharisees had been paying attention, they would have realized that he loves all of us. You don't have to be a Jew. You don't have to be an Israelite for him to love you. He loves everybody. And I think that's part of the reason that he used these two women to be in the genealogy of Jesus.
It's very interesting. Trish threw a devotion on my desk when I was in the middle of this. I talked about it before. I won't get into it. About the thief on the cross. The thief on the cross was just as valuable at that time as I am. And the thief's in paradise. I know it. Probably didn't do a lot of good acts. But there he is. Yes, sir.
And the fourth commandment is, and the stranger that is within thy gates. God was trying to, in my opinion here, God was trying to include the strangers, the benefits of the Sabbath, not to look at this negative. Gotta do this and that, but properly kept, the Sabbath was a fantastic day that reveled in God's benefit. Keeping the Sabbath. And he saw strangers. The Old Testament is full of instruction about how to treat foreigners and strangers. God, you can just see God's care and love keeping out everywhere about how he wants people to be treated, or what their background or their lineage is.
The story is billed as continuation of Naomi's line. It's really the continuation of God's line, God's family. And adoption works, his family.
What's out with Boaz is doing what's right. He's willing to give Ruth up to the closer of kin, but at least he knows she will be taken care of. So even if it's not for selfish reasons, he may not have ever thought, wow, I'll get Ruth, willing to risk, because he thought she would be cared for.
All right, to do what's right. Let's center on that for a second. Did Ruth do what was right?
Yes.
Did Naomi do what was right? Did Boaz do what was right?
Yes.
And they did it when it was really hard to make that choice.
It required sacrifice.
It requires sacrifice, there's pain, there's risk. They did what was right when it wasn't easy to do right.
Desperate people do desperate things, and we've established that Ruth and Naomi were very desperate. And when these people went and looked for the solution, they chose the solution within the boundaries of what God had set out. They did what was right, which was risky because back in those days, you didn't took what you wanted. They chose not to do that. They chose to follow God, both.
I mean, let's center this like for us here. Have you ever had a really difficult thing to do and you knew it was the right thing to do, but you didn't do it because it was just going to be so darn hard, you just weren't going to do it? Do you ever make that decision? Huh? That's where lessons come in for life. And because the same people who just said, yeah, I did that. Also, if I ask the question, because of the lessons you learned when you did that, and all of a sudden you had to come with grips with something that was really tough. just did it. It was an easy decision, hard execution. Most of the things in life, the decision, think about it, isn't that difficult. But the execution of that decision, very painful.
I've puzzled over this kinsman that was supposed to take her. And it says, verse 4, and he said, I will redeem it. Then said Boaz, that day, the day that you buy the field from Naomi, you get this woman Ruth. Actually, I wonder if he did the right thing in thinking through that wouldn't work for the family situation. Did he do the wrong thing in discarding it because he didn't want that? That's just a question I've had. Not as bad as Stacy's question.
I wanna, as we wrap up here,
Go ahead.
this is the conclusion of these wonderful 4 chapters with this wonderful story. What are the lessons that we can pull out that these participants taught us? What are some of the things we get from it? I wrote a few things down here. Does anything come to mind for you that you can carry out of this room? Any thoughts?
There's not a respect.
Talk to you about that after class. I don't know what you're talking about. After class. Anything come to mind? Yeah.
It's like lots of stories in the Bible when we find ourselves in very dismal circumstances. Where things seem hopeless. God always knows what we're going through. Wants us to have faith in him that he'll follow his urgings, his ways, that he will find a way to help us out. Like he did with Joseph, Daniel, Shadrach. Times are tough, he's always there. Just take it out, be patient.
This is some of the things that I came up with in doing this. It's this one, risk. And what I wrote down is, do not sidestep hard choices. They are the right choices. If they're right and it's hard, gotta do it. Elimelech moving his family to Judah from to Moab because of the famine. And then going back to Bethlehem after the death. I think one of my values, the second thing that is important to me, is loyalty. I mean, am I really loyal to my friends? Loyalty is really, really important to me. In fact, I think that might be the heart of this entire book. How loyal people are to each other. How loyal I am to you, and how loyal you are to me. I think integrity and honor are on this list. And I think Boaz really had that embedded as one of his values. I think he did. I think that the other one is respect. That everyone, it's respect for the individual, respect that everyone has value. And there were participants, characters in this story, where at that time, society gave them no value. Society gave them no respect. But one person did that was respected, and that was Boaz. So that's where Boaz really resonates with me. And the other one, for me, is don't quit. You never quit. It might change. You might be down and out. You might be going through a divorce, death of somebody, they had just been fired. Financially, things can be tough. You wake up in the morning and you are empty and you do not know what you're going to do. You just don't quit. You get up and you make your bed. You move on. You don't quit. And I gotta tell you, if someone's around you and you feel as if they're in that place, that's time for you to knock on the door and be Boaz. That's time for you to knock on the door and be a loyal friend. And those little things that happen, you will be contributing to somebody else just like he did to you. During a time when it was really difficult and really hard, he showed up. Well, how many times in your life did you show up? You have, and you probably don't even remember it. But 50 years from now, somebody's going to tell your story in a class like this because you changed their life. That's why every single one of us have the opportunity to really change the world in little ways, and that's what heroes are made of. Those things. I'll read you this and then I'm done. I wrote this a couple days ago. This is most apparent from the persona of Boaz in the capacity of a guardian redeemer who chose to use his position, wealth, and authority to raise the widows Naomi and Ruth from their anguish. This story of Ruth then is one of redemption, of how one woman's loyalty and steadfast integrity was rewarded with redemption through the character of Boaz. In the same way, God was a guardian redeemer for each and every one of us in the person of Jesus, who is loyal and ever willing to offer us salvation, having paid the price for our sins. And we need to only accept our Redeemer.
Well, what a lesson. What a lesson. Thank you. Well done. Mhm. Me, I'm gonna ask a question, but don't answer. We're out of time. Who got the most out? Who really walked out of this story of these three characters the happy? Boaz got a trophy wife. Ruth got her baby. Naomi got the grandson. To me, Naomi was the big winner. Naomi walked out of that deal holding that baby. What a day. Finally got there. So she's the big hero for me. Love them all. I read what Venus is to the solar system, what the Mona Lisa is to art. Ruth is scriptures, is a masterpiece. Next week, we're going to be going just a little bit a different direction. We're going to be talking about scoundrels. We're going into Jacob for 4 or 5 weeks. And I'm going to be teaching next week, and I'm going to read you a story about the biggest scoundrel that I think I ever met. It turned out to be just amazing. I've read the story a couple of times over the last 20 years, but every time I read it, I go back a few years later and I'm just astounded about this guy. So I hope to see you next week. Ruby, would you mind having a word? By the way, Doug will be here, Doug Telfer will be here the second Sabbath and the third Sabbath of May in person. He'll be teaching. 2 in a row.